Mira balanced a tray of steaming cups in her hands as she moved between the crowded tables of the little cafe. The evening was busy, as it always was near the end of the week. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of fresh bread. Customers spoke loudly, some laughing, others rushing to finish a meal before returning to their work. For Mira, it was just another day, another long shift that she had to endure for the sake of her family. Her life had not been easy. She once dreamed of sitting in a classroom, surrounded by books, learning about languages and cultures. She had always loved words, loved how they connected people across the world. But those dreams had ended too soon when her mother had fallen ill. Bills grew, tuition fees became impossible, and Mira had quietly walked away from her studies. Now, the cafe was her world, and each cup of coffee she served was a small step toward keeping the house running. That evening, the door opened with a sharp chime. A group of men in expensive suits walked in, their polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor. Their confident steps and serious faces made it clear they were not ordinary customers. They were businessmen, perhaps from one of the big offices nearby. The owner of the cafe hurried forward to welcome them, offering them the best corner table. Mira noticed them too. She didn't pay much attention to rich customers, she had seen many over the months, but something about the tall man in the center caught her eye. He had an air of authority, and even as he smiled faintly, there was strength in the way he carried himself. His name was Arjun, though Mira only realized it later. Tonight, to her, he was simply another guest she had to serve with patience. She walked to the table, notebook in hand, and greeted them politely. "Good evening, sir. What would you like to order?" The men glanced at the menu, speaking in low voices. Arjun, the tall man, looked up and said, "We'll take 4 cups of black coffee and some snacks." Mira nodded and went back to the counter. Soon, she returned with a tray balanced carefully on her hands. She placed the cups in front of each man and arranged the plates neatly. At first, the businessmen ignored her, talking among themselves about contracts and deals. Their voices grew louder, and soon a sheet of paper was placed on the table. Arjun pointed at it, frowning. "This part, it's in another language. None of us can understand it." One of the men laughed. "Well, unless we find a translator, we're stuck." Arjun leaned back in his chair. His eyes shifted to Mira, who was standing nearby, ready to clear an empty tray. For a moment, his lips curved in amusement. Then he said, half joking, "Hey, waitress. Translate this for me, and I'll give you my salary." The table burst into laughter. The men found the idea ridiculous. How could a cafe girl understand a business document in a foreign tongue? To them, it was just harmless fun, a passing joke to lighten the moment. Mira paused. She looked at the paper, then at Arjun. She could have walked away quietly, pretending she didn't hear. But something in her heart told her to stop. She had spent years studying languages before life had forced her onto a different path. This was her world, the world of words and meanings, and she would not let the laughter push her down. "May I see it?" she asked softly. The men exchanged surprised glances. Arjun raised an eyebrow but handed her the document, still amused. Mira scanned the lines carefully. The words flowed easily in her mind, as if she had never left her studies. She spoke clearly, translating sentence after sentence into simple, fluent words. Her voice was steady, confident, and each phrase rolled off her tongue like a melody she had always known. The laughter at the table faded. Silence replaced it. The businessmen leaned forward, listening as Mira explained the meaning without hesitation. When she finished, she placed the paper back on the table and stepped aside politely. "That is what it says," she said quietly. The men were speechless. One of them muttered, "Incredible," another rubbed his forehead in disbelief. But it was Arjun's reaction that stood out. His playful smile was gone. He stared at Mira with surprise, his mind turning quickly. He had expected nothing from her, perhaps a confused look, perhaps an awkward smile, but never this. Never the confidence, never the fluency. For a few seconds, the cafe was quiet except for the soft sound of the coffee machine behind the counter. Then one of the men chuckled nervously, trying to break the silence. "Looks like you underestimated her, Arjun." Arjun didn't reply. He was still studying Mira, as if trying to understand how a young waitress in a small cafe could carry such hidden knowledge. Mira simply bowed her head slightly and turned to leave, her tray in hand. To her, it was nothing extraordinary, just a part of herself she had long buried. But for Arjun, it was the beginning of curiosity, the spark of a story that would soon change both their lives. That night, long after the businessmen left, Mira stood by the counter wiping the last cup. She thought of her mother, of her unfinished studies, and of the laughter that had filled the room before she spoke. For the first time in years, she felt a small flicker of pride. Maybe her dreams were not lost completely. Maybe there was still a place for her beyond the walls of the cafe. And somewhere in the city, Arjun too could not stop thinking about the young waitress who had turned his careless joke into a moment of silence. The cafe had returned to its usual quiet the next morning, but Mira's heart was still restless. She kept remembering the surprised look on the CEO's face, the way the laughter at the table had died when she translated his document with ease. For her, it was just a natural thing, something she had studied for years before leaving her education behind. But for those men, it had been a shock, almost impossible to believe. Mira shook her head as she wiped a table. She could not allow herself to dream too much. She was just a waitress now. Her mother was waiting at home with medicines, and there were bills stacked neatly on the small wooden shelf. Dreams did not pay for food, and they could not buy the costly treatments her mother needed. Still, she felt a tiny spark inside her, a voice whispering that perhaps she was meant for something more. That same evening, Arjun sat in his office high above the city. The glass walls reflected the lights outside, but his mind was elsewhere. He leaned back in his chair, remembering the girl from the cafe. A young woman with tired eyes but steady confidence. He had teased her carelessly, thinking she would shy away, but instead, she had shown a skill even his trained staff sometimes struggled with. Strange, he murmured to himself. What is a girl like that doing in a small cafe? He had met hundreds of employees, assistants, and translators over the years, but very few had spoken with such clarity, such natural ease. It wasn't just knowledge, it was passion, something that came from deep within. For reasons he couldn't explain, Arjun wanted to know more. The next day, the bell above the cafe door rang once again. Mira looked up from behind the counter and froze. It was him, the same tall man with sharp eyes and the commanding presence. He was alone this time, without the group of businessmen. His suit looked even more formal in the small cafe, and customers turned to glance at him with curiosity. Arjun walked to the counter and smiled politely. "Good morning," he said. Mira straightened herself. "Good morning, sir. Would you like coffee?" "Yes. Black coffee, please." She nodded and began preparing it. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. Why had he come back? Surely he did not visit cafes like this often. When she placed the cup before him, he thanked her and sat down at a corner table. For a few minutes, he sipped his coffee in silence, watching her as she served other customers. Then, when the cafe grew quieter, he gestured for her to come over. "Sit for a moment," he said kindly. Mira hesitated. She rarely sat with customers, but something about his tone told her it was not a request she could easily refuse. She sat down carefully, her hands folded in her lap. Arjun pulled out a small folder from his bag. "Yesterday," he began, "you surprised me. I wasn't expecting you to understand that document. But you did it quickly and with perfect accuracy." Mira lowered her gaze. "I studied languages in university," she admitted softly. But I had to leave because of family problems. I work here now to support my mother. There was silence for a moment. Arjun studied her face, noticing the quiet strength in her eyes. Which languages do you know? He asked. English, French, and a little German, she replied. I was also learning Japanese before I had to stop. Arjun raised his eyebrows. That is impressive. Most people struggle with even one foreign language. Mira smiled faintly. I like words. They feel like bridges between people. When I learn a language, I feel like I am entering another world. Her voice carried a softness that made Arjun pause. He realized she wasn't just skilled, she was passionate, something rare and valuable. Do you ever think about going back to your studies? He asked. Mira shook her head. I can't. My mother needs me. Tuition is too expensive, and I cannot leave my job. Her words carried no bitterness, only quiet acceptance. That touched Arjun more than he expected. Before leaving, Arjun placed another document on the table. Translate this for me, he said. Mira glanced at it and began reading. Her translation was smooth, every phrase delivered with confidence. When she finished, Arjun nodded slowly. You are talented, he said firmly. This shouldn't be hidden here. You deserve better than carrying trays all day. Mira felt her cheeks warm. Thank you, sir. But life doesn't always give us what we deserve. Arjun looked at her for a long moment before standing. We'll see, he said simply, and walked out of the cafe. That night, Mira returned home tired but thoughtful. Her mother was waiting in their small living room, her face pale but smiling. How was work today? Her mother asked. Mira sat beside her, holding her hand. It was different, she whispered. She didn't explain everything, but she couldn't stop thinking about the CEO's words. Maybe he would forget her by tomorrow. Maybe it was just another passing moment in his busy life. But deep inside, Mira knew something had shifted. For the first time in years, someone had looked at her not as a poor waitress, not as a girl forced to leave her studies, but as a person with hidden worth. And though she tried to push the thought away, her heart dared to wonder, what if this was not the end of her story, but the beginning? The morning sun filled the cafe with a golden glow, but Mira hardly noticed it. She was moving from table to table, carrying trays and greeting customers with her usual soft smile. Yet inside her mind, there was a restlessness she could not ignore. The memory of Arjun's visit lingered. His serious words, the way he had watched her as if she was someone important, not just a waitress, it had unsettled her heart. She tried to remind herself that he was a wealthy businessman, far away from her world. People like him came and went, they never stayed in places like this. Still, she could not stop herself from wondering if she would see him again. That afternoon, as she wiped the counter, the bell over the cafe door rang. Mira glanced up, and her breath caught. It was him, Arjun, dressed in his usual crisp suit, his tall frame commanding attention. Customers turned their heads, whispering, but he walked calmly toward the same corner table where he had sat before. Her manager hurried to serve him, but Arjun raised a hand gently. I would like her to bring my coffee, he said, pointing toward Mira. Mira's manager looked surprised but nodded. Go ahead, he told her. She walked carefully to his table, tray in hand. Good afternoon, sir. The usual. Yes, black coffee, he replied. As she served the cup, Arjun placed a folder on the table. Sit for a moment. I need your help. Mira hesitated. Sir, I'm working. I've spoken with your manager, Arjun interrupted. He allowed it. Slowly, she sat across from him, feeling the curious eyes of other customers on her back. Arjun opened the folder and slid a paper toward her. It was filled with paragraphs in a foreign language. Translate this, he said. Mira scanned the words. Her lips moved softly as she read, then she began to speak, translating line by line with the same ease as before. Her voice was calm and clear, every sentence flowing naturally. When she finished, Arjun leaned back, clearly impressed. "Flawless," he said. "Do you realize how valuable this skill is?" Mira lowered her eyes. "It doesn't matter, sir. I cannot use it anywhere. I had to leave my studies. I am just a waitress now." Arjun's expression hardened. "Don't say just. You are not just anything. Talent like this is rare, and it deserves recognition." Mira looked at him uncertainly. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. For years, she had been invisible, carrying trays and cleaning tables. But here was a man of power telling her she was more than that. After a pause, Arjun continued, "I want to make you an offer. Come work at my company. At first, as a temporary translator. If you do well, it can become permanent." Mira froze. She wasn't sure if she had heard correctly. "Work, at your company?" "Yes," Arjun said simply. "You have the skills. I need someone like you. And I promise, it will pay far better than this cafe." Her heart raced. For a moment, she pictured herself in an office, surrounded by books and documents, using her languages again. It felt like a dream. But almost instantly, fear crept in. "Sir," she whispered, "I don't belong in such places. I have no degree. I don't know how to work in offices. And, my mother depends on me. I cannot risk losing this job." Arjun listened patiently. "I understand your fears. But this is not a risk, it is a chance. You will not lose anything. If it doesn't work out, you can always return here. But if you never try, you will never know what you are capable of." His words stirred something deep inside her. She thought of her mother, of the countless nights she had stayed awake worrying about medicines and bills. She thought of her younger self, sitting in classrooms, her eyes shining with excitement as she learned new words. Somewhere along the way, that girl had been left behind. Arjun's gaze was steady. "Don't let your talent go to waste, Mira. You have the strength to rise higher. I can see it." Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. A part of her wanted to believe him, but another part whispered that dreams were dangerous, they led only to disappointment. I will think about it," she finally said. Arjun nodded, respecting her hesitation. "Good. Take your time. But don't take too long. Opportunities don't wait forever." He stood, leaving payment for his coffee on the table. As he walked out, his presence seemed to linger in the small cafe. That evening, Mira returned home, her mind heavy with thoughts. She placed the bread and medicine on the table, and her mother smiled faintly from her chair. "You seem quiet," her mother said gently. "Something happened at work." Mira hesitated, then explained everything. She told her mother about the CEO, about the translation, and finally, about the offer. Her mother listened silently, her tired eyes softening. "And what do you feel in your heart?" she asked. Mira looked down. "I feel afraid. What if I fail? What if I don't fit in that world?" Her mother squeezed her hand weakly. "My child, you have already been through so much. You face every day with strength. Do you really think you cannot handle a new place? I believe you can. And if it gives you happiness, if it lets you use your gift, then you should try." Tears stung Mira's eyes. Her mother's words carried more weight than anything else. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Mira knew her life was about to change. Fear still sat in her chest, but alongside it was something stronger: hope. The next step was uncertain, but perhaps, for the first time in years, the road ahead was no longer dark. The following week began like any other for Mira, but inside her, everything felt different. Arjun's offer kept echoing in her heart. She had spent nights thinking about it, her mind swinging between fear and hope. Finally, with her mother's gentle encouragement, she had decided to try. On her first day, she stood outside the tall glass building of Arjun's company, clutching her small bag tightly. The structure looked enormous compared to the little cafe where she had worked for years. People in neat suits hurried in and out, speaking quickly into their phones, their polished shoes clicking on the floor. Mira took a deep breath. She felt small, almost invisible, but she reminded herself of her mother's words, "You are stronger than you think." When she entered, the receptionist greeted her kindly and guided her to the translation department. Everything looked so professional: the shiny floors, the soft hum of machines, the faint smell of paper and ink. She wondered if she really belonged here. Arjun met her briefly in the hallway. He smiled warmly. "I'm glad you came. Don't worry, just be yourself. Your work will speak for you." His words gave her some courage. She followed the assistant, who showed her to a desk filled with documents. For the first time in years, instead of balancing trays, her hands touched papers and pens, her mind diving into languages she loved. But the road was not smooth. Many employees noticed her and whispered among themselves. Some were curious, others doubtful. "She used to be a waitress," one of them muttered. "How can she work here?" Mira heard the comments, but she chose silence. She remembered her struggles and knew she could not waste this chance. She focused on her work, translating every line with care, checking each word twice. During lunch, when most workers gathered in groups, Mira sat alone with her small box of food. She felt out of place, but she told herself it was only the beginning. If she stayed strong, she would prove her worth. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, her work began to speak louder than the whispers. Her translations were clear and accurate, sometimes even better than those of experienced staff. When a foreign client sent a document filled with complex phrases, Mira translated it without hesitation. Arjun himself reviewed her work and nodded with satisfaction. One evening, as she packed her things, Arjun passed by her desk. "You did excellent work today." The client was very impressed, he said. Mira looked up shyly. "Thank you, sir. I just tried my best." Arjun smiled. "That's all I ask. Keep doing your best, and you will go far." Those words lit a small fire in her heart. She returned home that night with a lighter step, telling her mother about the praise she had received. Her mother's eyes filled with pride, and for the first time, Mira felt she was truly moving forward. Still, challenges did not end. A few co-workers were not pleased with her growing recognition. Some whispered that she had received special favor from the CEO. Others mocked her quiet nature. But whenever doubt entered her heart, Mira reminded herself of the path she had already walked. She had faced poverty, pain, and long nights of struggle. Compared to that, whispers were nothing. One afternoon, while others chatted noisily in the office, Mira focused on a thick set of documents. She stayed late, working until her eyes grew tired. Unknown to her, Arjun passed by and noticed her still at her desk. He paused, watching the determination on her face. It reminded him of why he had brought her here, not out of kindness, but because he saw true ability in her. The turning point came during a small company meeting. A visiting client from France spoke quickly, using phrases that confused the team. The official translator hesitated, flipping through his notes. Silence filled the room, and tension rose. Without thinking, Mira stepped forward. She began translating the client's words clearly and politely, bridging the gap with ease. Everyone stared at her, surprised by her confidence. The client smiled, impressed, and the meeting moved smoothly again. Afterward, Arjun addressed the staff. "This is Mira," he said proudly. "She is new, but her skills have already proven valuable. Let her example remind us that true talent can come from anywhere." A hush filled the room. For the first time, Mira felt seen not as a former waitress but as a professional in her own right. That night, Mira walked home under the stars, her steps steady and strong. She thought of the cafe, of the nights she had stood by the counter wiping cups, dreaming silently of another life. And now, here she was living that life. It wasn't easy, and challenges still waited ahead, but she was no longer afraid. At home, her mother listened to her story and smiled gently. "See, my child," she whispered, "I told you your gift would find its place." Mira held her mother's hand and felt tears of quiet joy. This was only the beginning. She had entered a new world, one filled with obstacles but also with hope. And deep inside, she promised herself that she would not waste this chance. She would grow, no matter how hard the path became. The days in Arjun's company passed quickly for Mira. With each assignment, she grew more confident. She learned how to work with deadlines, how to manage large sets of documents, and how to speak in meetings without fear. Yet, while some colleagues began to respect her, not everyone accepted her presence. There were still whispers in the office. Some people said she didn't deserve the position because she had no degree. Others claimed she was given special attention only because the CEO liked her. Mira tried to ignore their words, but sometimes, when she was alone at her desk, she felt the sting of those doubts. Still, she reminded herself of her journey. She had not come this far by luck alone. She had worked hard, studied hard, and faced struggles most people in that office had never known. She promised herself that no matter how heavy the burden became, she would not give up. A few weeks later, a major opportunity arrived for the company. An international deal was in progress with a group of foreign investors. The documents were long and complicated, filled with technical terms that required perfect translation. Arjun decided to entrust part of the task to Mira. "This project is important," Arjun told her during a meeting. "Our success depends on accuracy. I believe you can handle this." Mira felt nervous, but she nodded. "I will do my best, sir." Her heart raced as she held the thick folder in her hands. It was her biggest responsibility yet, one that could decide the future of the company's deal. She worked long hours, staying late at her desk, her eyes burning as she checked each word carefully. But not everyone wanted her to succeed. Among the staff was Rohan, a senior translator who had been working in the company for years. He disliked the way Arjun praised Mira and often complained that she was given too much importance. In his eyes, she was still a waitress who had suddenly stepped into a world she didn't deserve. One evening, when most of the office had left, Rohan quietly switched a few pages in Mira's folder with incorrect versions. His plan was simple: she would fail, the mistake would embarrass her, and she would lose Arjun's trust. The next morning, Mira returned to her desk and continued her work. At first, she didn't notice the changes. But as she compared different sections, something felt wrong. Certain sentences were unclear, and some translations didn't match the tone of the rest. Her eyes narrowed. She had studied these languages long enough to recognize when something was out of place. She carefully checked each page and discovered that some were indeed altered. Her hands trembled. Someone had tried to sabotage her. For a moment, fear gripped her heart. If she reported this, no one might believe her. If she stayed silent, the mistakes would remain, and the deal could collapse. Either way, the blame might fall on her. But then she remembered her mother's words, "You have the strength to face any storm." She straightened her back and decided to correct everything before it was too late. Mira worked harder than ever, rewriting the altered parts and cross-checking every sentence. Hours passed, but she didn't stop until she was completely sure the document was perfect. By the time the meeting with the investors began, her eyes were heavy, but her heart was steady. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. The investors sat on one side of the table, their expressions serious. Arjun led the meeting, but when the documents were presented, he turned to Mira. "Please explain this section," he said. Mira stood, her voice calm but confident. She translated fluently, explaining the meaning with clarity. The investors nodded, pleased with her work. She continued, page after page, until the entire presentation was complete. At the end, one of the investors smiled and said, "Your translator is excellent. We are satisfied." Relief washed over Arjun's face. "Thank you," he said, glancing at Mira with pride. The deal was sealed successfully. After the meeting, Arjun called the staff together. "I want to thank Mira for her hard work. This project would not have been successful without her dedication." The room filled with polite claps. Some people looked surprised, others uncomfortable. Rohan avoided her eyes, his plan silently broken. Mira bowed her head slightly. "I only did my duty, sir." But inside, her heart was soaring. For the first time, she felt not just like a beginner but as someone who truly belonged in this world. That evening, as she walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, she thought about everything that had happened. Life was still full of challenges, but she had faced one of the biggest tests and had come out stronger. When she reached home, her mother noticed the sparkle in her eyes. "Something good happened today." Mira smiled. "Yes, Emma. I think I'm finally finding my place." Her mother hugged her gently, and Mira felt the weight of her struggles turn a little lighter. She knew there would be more storms ahead. But now, she also knew she could stand tall against them. The success of the international deal gave Mira a new place in the company. People who once doubted her now began to notice her differently. Some still whispered, but the whispers grew weaker. Her work had spoken louder than their doubts. For Mira, it was more than just recognition. It was proof that she could face challenges, even when others tried to push her down. Yet, deep inside, she still carried the fear of losing everything. After all, her life had always been uncertain. Arjun, however, had started to see her in a different light. He had always respected skill, but what impressed him most was her determination. Many employees worked for money or success, but Mira worked with heart. She carried both responsibility and sincerity in everything she did. One afternoon, Arjun asked Mira to bring some documents to his office. When she entered, he gestured for her to sit. "You've done well, Mira," he said. "Not just in this deal, but in every task I've given you." Mira lowered her gaze modestly. "Thank you, sir. I only tried my best." Arjun smiled. "That's what makes you different. You don't take shortcuts. You remind me of why I started my own journey years ago." His words surprised her. To her, he was a successful man, someone who had always lived in comfort. But in that moment, she realized he too had a story behind his success. "Sir," she asked softly, "was it difficult for you in the beginning?" Arjun leaned back in his chair. "Very. I wasn't born into wealth. I worked small jobs, saved every coin, and struggled through failures. Many people laughed at me. But I kept going. That's why I recognize the same strength in you." Mira listened quietly, her respect for him deepening. For the first time, she saw him not just as a CEO but as a man who had also walked through hardship. In the weeks that followed, Arjun gave her more responsibilities. Sometimes, he invited her to sit in important meetings, not as a silent observer but as someone whose opinions mattered. At first, she felt nervous speaking among experienced professionals, but Arjun encouraged her gently. "Don't be afraid," he would say. "Your thoughts are valuable. Speak with confidence." Slowly, she began to share her ideas, and often, her suggestions surprised even senior staff. Arjun supported her openly, making it clear that he trusted her. This trust created whispers once again, but Mira didn't let them weaken her. She knew she had earned this place through hard work, not through favor. Outside of work, Arjun learned more about her personal life. One day, When she looked especially tired, he asked, "Are you all right?" Mira hesitated, then admitted, "My mother's health has been difficult lately. The treatments are expensive." Arjun's expression softened. He didn't press further, but later that week, Mira was shocked to find that her mother's medical bills had been partly covered by an anonymous donor. She guessed who it might be. When she met Arjun in the office, she quietly said, "Did you help with my mother's expenses?" He didn't answer directly, but his calm smile told her enough. "Your focus should be on your work and your dreams," he said. "Don't let worries pull you down." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Thank you, sir. But please know I don't want to depend on kindness. I want to stand on my own." Arjun nodded with respect. "And you will. But even the strongest people need support sometimes. Accept it, then move forward." Their bond grew stronger, not through favors, but through mutual trust. Arjun trusted her with important projects, and Mira trusted his guidance. At the same time, jealousy among a few employees grew. Rumors spread, suggesting she was given special attention. One afternoon, Mira overheard two workers whispering unkindly about her. For a moment, her heart sank, but she reminded herself that people only doubted what they did not understand. Later, during a staff meeting, Arjun addressed the team firmly. "Let me make one thing clear. Mira is here because of her skill, not because of anything else. Talent deserves respect, no matter where it comes from." The room fell silent. For Mira, those words meant more than any applause. It was proof that someone believed in her when the world still doubted. One evening, after finishing work, Mira stood near the office window, watching the city lights flicker. Arjun walked by and paused beside her. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" he asked. Mira smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But I feel I still have a long way to go." Arjun nodded. "That's true for all of us. Success isn't an end, it's a journey. And you, Mira, have only just begun." His words filled her with quiet strength. She realized that she was no longer the same girl who once stood in the cafe, carrying trays and hiding her dreams. She was changing, growing not because life had suddenly become easy, but because she had found courage inside herself. That night, as she returned home, her mother noticed the light in her eyes. "You look different," her mother said softly. Mira laughed gently. "Maybe because I'm starting to believe in myself." Her mother held her hand. "I always believed in you. Now you are finally seeing what I have seen all along." Mira's heart warmed. She knew challenges were not over. But now, she wasn't walking alone. She had earned trust, respect, and most importantly, faith in her own abilities. And that was stronger than any doubt the world could throw her way. The months that followed felt like a new season in Mira's life. The girl who once stood in a small cafe with tired eyes was no longer the same. Her confidence had grown, her voice carried weight, and her dreams were no longer silent wishes but living steps on her path forward. In the company, her name became known for her dedication. Clients asked for her ideas, colleagues sought her advice, and Arjun trusted her more with each passing day. But Mira never let pride take over her heart. She remembered too well the long nights of worry, the endless hours of balancing studies with work, and the kindness that had helped her climb. One morning, Arjun called her into his office. He was sitting by the window, the sunlight falling across his desk. "Mira," he began, his voice calm yet filled with meaning, "there is something important I wish to discuss." Mira sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I've been watching your progress," he continued. "You have grown far beyond what I expected when you first joined. It is time for you to take another step forward." She looked at him with wide eyes. "Another step?" "Yes," Arjun said. "I want you to lead a new project. Not as an assistant, but as the main head. You will have your own small team. This will test your leadership, not just your knowledge. Mira's heart raced. She had never thought she would reach such a position so soon. A mix of excitement and fear filled her. Sir, do you really believe I can handle this? Arjun smiled warmly. I don't just believe it. I am certain. You have earned this. The news spread quickly in the office. Some were shocked, some jealous, and others quietly impressed. Mira felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders, but instead of fear, she chose determination. She remembered Arjun's words, success is a journey. This was simply her next step. In the weeks that followed, Mira worked with her small team tirelessly. At first, the team members doubted her, thinking she was too young or inexperienced to lead. But Mira didn't raise her voice or force authority. She showed leadership through patience, listening, and hard work. She stayed late with them, discussed ideas openly, and gave credit where it was due. Slowly, their doubt turned into respect. By the time the project was near completion, her team had become united, not out of fear of her, but out of trust in her. At home, her mother noticed the changes too. Mira often came back late but with a glow of quiet pride on her face. You carry yourself differently now, her mother said one evening while they shared dinner. Mira smiled softly. Maybe because I finally feel like I belong somewhere. Her mother touched her hand gently. You always belonged, my child. You only needed the world to see it too. Those words touched Mira deeply. For the first time, she felt the truth of them. The day of the project presentation arrived. The hall was filled with company leaders and important clients. Mira stood at the front, her notes in her hands, but her heart was calm. She looked across the room and found Arjun watching her with quiet encouragement. As she spoke, her voice was clear and confident. She explained the ideas, the process, and the results with simplicity but also with passion. Every sentence carried her belief, not just in the project, but in herself. When she finished, the room filled with applause. The clients nodded in approval, the leaders praised her, and even those who once doubted her were silent with surprise. For Mira, the applause was not just for her work. It was for the journey she had walked, from serving tables in a cafe to standing tall in a hall of leaders. After the meeting, Arjun approached her. His eyes carried pride, though his words were simple. You did well, Mira. You didn't just lead a project, you proved that strength comes from within. Mira bowed her head respectfully. I only tried to do my best. Arjun shook his head gently. No, you did more than that. You transformed yourself. Those words stayed with her long after the hall had emptied. That night, when Mira walked home under the quiet sky, she thought about her journey. She remembered the cafe, the day she met Arjun, the laughter when he had challenged her with the translation, and the way her life had changed since then. Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She whispered softly to herself, I didn't just survive. I grew. Her mother, waiting by the window, opened the door as Mira arrived. The two embraced warmly. Your father would have been proud, her mother whispered, her voice trembling. Mira smiled through her tears. Then I will keep working, not just for myself, but for both of you. In the days ahead, Mira's story became an inspiration. To her colleagues, she was proof that background did not decide future. To her mother, she was a daughter who had turned struggle into strength. And to herself, she was no longer just a young waitress with hidden dreams. She was Mira, the woman who dared to believe, the woman who earned respect, the woman who transformed her life with courage and honesty. And though her journey had only begun, she knew one truth clearly, the world may doubt, but faith in oneself could change everything.